have done little workshops periodically the whole time that I've worked at Pleasant Hill Middle School, just trying to bring in that mental health perspective into the general ed population as much as possible. And so I was talking to my administrator, the principal, Terry McCormick, about kind of the need of the staff at the moment. And she talked a lot about sort of these goals that felt sort of overlapping to me, bringing down suspension rates, increasing connectivity, trying to help kids feel more included on a campus. And all of those things to me just spoke to how are we connecting, how are we relating as students and staff. And for me, that immediately brings up attachment. And so I brought this workshop because I know that is an underpinning for how we connect to each other, how we relate to the kids in our classes. It's how we relate to our coworkers and to our own families. And so I knew that if we wanted to, increase test scores, if we wanted to increase motivation, if we wanted to decrease suspension rates, all of that comes back to relationship and making sure that there's firm and warm relationships for every student in the school, both on a peer level and then also to their teachers. And so I was like, well, maybe if I introduce this theory and we kind of talk about why you might have some difficulties with a student in your class, and we really get some theoretical understanding for what might be getting in the way. Maybe when I go to the teachers later and we're trying to troubleshoot problems in a class, I wanted us to kind of have a shared understanding of all of the mental health components, all of the relational components that could be in play. So a little selfish on my end. I wanted us all to start from a common understanding of what might be happening and what might be contributing to the dynamic. I would love to hear from Lily about this too. For me, I was mostly struck by how many people came up to me afterwards and talked to me about the workshop. Like I said, I've done a number of these over the years, and typically, people are polite and listening, and there might be some scattered interest. But I had maybe 5 or 6 people ask me to send them the PowerPoint because they wanted to see it again. And I had some teachers that I kind of consider kind of curmudgeonly. They're very old school, very old style, kind of like the teacher says something, the student does it. I had one teacher that stayed after with me and started talking about her own attachment style and and started crying, which I think is common. I think it touches something in us when we really start talking about like how we relate to the world and how our parents related to us. Like that brings up stuff. So the response was encouraging. I wanted teachers to start thinking about what they needed coming into a school. I wanted them to make that connection to their childhood and to that little kid that's still inside of them, and how they needed their teachers to relate to them, and how either of those teachers rose to that challenge or did not, and start thinking about that in the context of their own teaching and the own way of relating to others. And I think maybe like the wheel started turning a little bit. I did not see some mass revolution. We talked a little bit about how I'd like to continue the work and how just finding the resources and time to do that would be very exciting, just because I was so encouraged by that like initial interest. But I don't know, Lily, I don't know if anything trickled down. You work very closely with the teachers, so.
Well, you stole some of what I was going to say. I think Heather and I actually had a conversation too about like your personal attachment style when we met. And I think there's something to be said about when teachers can connect to what you're teaching, same with like how our students can connect. And I think it really like goes back to who are we as the professionals coming into the space, and who are we as just like individuals that are creating like the best health for ourselves, given how stressful of a job education can be. And I think we forget, like when you're in education, you are very aware it's a stressful job, and yet there's some disconnect between, because it's a stressful job, we have to really feed ourselves and figure out who we are, to best show up for ourselves and our students. And I think one of the ways that we are able to do that is through understanding our attachment and the way we can connect with our students and our, especially our other staff, and creating a full school community. I think teachers have definitely created more of that relationship skills with their students. And I think they're able to kind of pick up those pieces as far as like, oh, it seems like this is kind of where this attachment is coming from. And they might not use specific words, but it's definitely clear they've picked up on certain language or certain themes that have allowed them to kind of understand the student. As a school counselor, I think a huge part of my job is to kind of like, hey, here is the synopsis of this kid. This is kind of like what we need from this student. Like, how can we work together? Like, very much like a case manager, and here is their portfolio. And like Hadley said, having that kind of shared understanding and that shared language goes a long way. So I think like, even if it's not, they have over 200 students a day at our district. So even if it's not like right in the moment when I'm able to sit down with them, they have like a new level of expertise of mental health that we really do need our teachers to have, because we see mental health just in every single part of our education now. And I think we've done a really good job of including that into a system that didn't always include it. And so when we're able to educate our teachers more on these common terms that Hadley and I are using all the time, I think it really helps create a system where students are thriving academically and just becoming real individuals that will later contribute to society in a much healthier way than we've seen previously.
So in our programs, our students have access to therapists their entire school day. They're getting pulled out for individual sessions once a week. They have group therapy. So it's really like a very intensive service, and it is at multiple different schools at multiple different levels. We have, grade school, a couple of them at grade school, 4 at the high school level, and then our middle school program that we have. And all of my colleagues, all of the ones that are in my position that hold a SEEC program under them, all of them are applying attachment theory to the work in some way. All of us, when we first get a kid, the first thing we want to understand about that child is their family of origin, any attachment disruptions, how are they relating to the adults and students around them, because that gives us just on like an assessment level, incredible information for how this student might approach us, how they might interact with the peers around them, some difficulties that we might have to troubleshoot, and then also the strengths to build on too. If we find out that we have a student that has a secure attachment to a parent, that is a huge bonus. That's like something that we can build on and that we can work with, and or do we really need to circle the wagons around some family therapy? So all of that right from the start is essential information. And then our program is built on building connection between students. So how do we correct that idea of who they are and who they are in relationship with each other if they were given the wrong impression as they developed? And so we do our community activities are all built on connection. We're always trying to build connection in our community activities. Our therapists, depending on the level, they're integrating some of that information about attachment styles, about how they're relating to people into their therapy. Our groups are definitely relationship oriented, social skills developing, and all of that is to kind of like help students understand better why relationships sometimes work and why they sometimes don't, how they're contributing, how their lenses might be, skewed a little bit depending on what their experience was. And also it does the great work of externalizing the problem. It's not that they're a bad person. It's not that they're the problem. It's that this was what they were taught to expect. This was what they adapted to survive. And so in certain contexts, the way they're relating with the world is a strength. It was a survival strategy. It got them to this place. And now that they might be in the safer, more stable situation, the way that they adapted just, it's not working any longer. And so so if we can start with that understanding and we can all approach our kids with that lens, then it's not the child that's the issue. It's not the parent, honestly, that's the issue. It's these attachment styles that have been passed down. It's these ways of relating that just isn't working any longer. So I love it for so many reasons. But I think that's probably my favorite, is that when we're working with students and we're working with families, we're able to externalize the problem and we're able to start working on finding just compassion for one another and trying to figure out, hey, we can choose a new way of relating. We can do this a new way. I think that if we're working with children, everything I do is tier 3, right? We're talking about kids that need a significant amount of support. If you're in this work for any length of time, you come with an appreciation of attachment theory. It's part of it. So my colleagues and I, when we've been talking, and as we're talking about like how we approach the work and how we do this, our district started to we took these programs back from, we used to work with CBOs and now we brought them back in-house about 5 years ago. And I would say right from the start, one of my colleagues and I, she's been here as long as I have been, and we were kind of talking about our approach to the work. And we realized that we come from very similar spots, which was, kind of half attachment, half relational, and then half behavioral. And that marriage is kind of what we've built the programs on. So, and then as we added people, they're very like-minded because they came organically from the work. They came from doing this type of work with this level of student need. And you cannot do it without a really firm understanding and appreciation for attachment and attachment work. It's, we're working with kids with a history of trauma. You cannot treat trauma without having an understanding of attachment theory. So yeah, it's funny. None of us really spearheaded it. It was a very organic kind of just, we all have just this shared understanding of what you need to know and what you need to be working with if you really want to make some progress and support these students.
I think in the therapy world right now, attachment theory is huge. I think like if you end up on that side of social media, it comes up a lot more than it used to, and kind of it becomes a huge part of, like you said, like just how we connect with absolutely everything from careers to individuals. And I also think it's getting more of a buzz just online in general. So it's creating this bridge that's very necessary in education. And I think, again, like the earlier we can have teachers who use the language and the kids get exposed to it, the more it helps them as they're getting older as well. I also wanted to touch on something you just said was about the behavior work. And I think Hadley can definitely, I believe she would agree with this, is I think when we are stressed teachers and behavior becomes such a focus because of the impact it has on the classroom and for others. And I think sometimes like we want to just fix said behavior. And in the ideal world, I would be able to pull this student and do a little worksheet or a little activity, and they would now all of a sudden not be impulsive. But that relationship is just so critical to seeing any sort of reinforcement, to having any sort of motivation for that kid to change. And I have a caseload of about 400, and those kiddos definitely, they know how they're connecting with the teacher, and that's very big on their behavior. And some of them are even able to vocalize that. And if we're able to connect that to their attachment and able to work with the teacher on, hey, this is coming from this and these different areas, I think it's really beneficial to the long-term goals and the longevity of the behavior work and their academic work. Just mention like I think friendships too, because you learn so much about your attachment style even through the friendships that you make in as early as kindergarten. And it does come back to that self-regulation of like, it's when you have an emotional need, and that starts, I mean, it starts right away. And so it continues at school, and the way that we respond to students' emotional needs, like we are also forming their attachment. And we have to acknowledge that responsibility, that it's not just parents, it's all of their connections and our responsibility to securely meet their needs as well, so that we are fostering those positive connections like Hadley was talking about with their work with their program.
That that's the piece that's so hard. I think we talked a little bit about this, but it's the difficulty of I think I touched hearts and minds and made people curious. And I think that they understood that kind of core point I was trying to get to, which is that the kids that need your connection most are probably the ones that are hardest to connect with, just by virtue of the attachment styles. And I think that worked, that set, people got it. And then they started doing the teaching. They started doing the work. And it was hard, right? It was hard to connect. And I'm sure that somewhere in the back of their minds, they're like, oh, like maybe like a little piece of the workshop like popped up. And I tried to share some like tools to try to like do some more connecting with your students. Like, how can you do these little bite-sized connection activities in a whirlwind, 45-minute class? But I think the problem is that unless you have that continuing education, unless you have people pushing in and continuing to give tools and then to problem solve and to troubleshoot when it doesn't work, I think that we get protective, right? We fall back into our old understandings, our old practices, our old way of doing things, just because it's a little easier. It's less agitating, right? And so we move away from the progress. And so that's my worry, is that if we don't have that continuing support for teachers, and if we don't have the sort of SEL lessons that students would really benefit from, if we're not really pushing that out, then it's not going to trickle down in the way that it needs to. It's not going to be implemented the way that it needs to. It takes a lot to do something new. And so that means a lot of support. That means a lot of training. That means a lot of education. So that's what I'd like to see next.
I think adding to what Hadley said is, I think it's how can you just kind of re-bring up the conversation. I think in education, there's so many topics that you want to be able to cover, and there's so much that we all need and want to be trained on. And I think if you pick like, this is the year we are learning about attachment, and that is like a goal for our site and connectedness. I think times when you do data review, or times when you have grade levels, like we have grade level meetings where we're supposed to talk about our students and like what they kind of need. And so really reinforcing from like that leadership perspective, like, hey, when you meet as a team, bring up what attachment are you seeing? What, like, who has this kid connected with? How do we see that connection? And really reinforcing that conversation as a part of like going alongside the data. And I think because we are talking about data so frequently in the schools now, that allows for multiple opportunities to bring that attachment work back in. And it allows to bring a face to those numbers. So I think it's really like, it's having routine, it's bringing it up, it's having like that consistency, because so much information is being thrown at you at any given point that as much as you can bring it up, the better.
I think it would be incredible if this was something that we taught as a matter of course, if this was something that was that that was rolled out right along with learning how to read, learning how to write, learning how to self-regulate, and what are the components of that, and how, you know, how does your attachment play into that? Like that, what a different way to bring up a group of humans, and what a different way to send them out into the world where everything is about relationships. So that emotional intelligent piece, I think, is going to continue to be more important than ever, because that's the piece that the humans bring to the work where AI is taking over everything else. What is going to make you a valuable member of a team? What is going to make you hireable? And it's going to be your emotional intelligence. It's going to be, how are you connecting with your coworkers? How are you able to navigate these social systems? Everything goes back to that. It's going to be essential. So I think it's crucial work. It's something I prioritize both in my therapy and my administrative work and with my own kids. It's a shame that you're seeing so little of it out in the world.
All grade levels. I feel like high school actually, I mean, we work with very much, middle schoolers are very much at their identity phase, but you definitely see it more in high school, and there's a different level of risk at that point. So I think really emphasizing that that's when you're going to start seeing a different level of these behaviors, and you really have such an amazing opportunity to intervene as an educator to create attachments that hopefully last a lifetime. Like I think all of us have those educators in our life that if we really connected with them, and they like had such a lasting impact on who we are as individuals. So I think there's not an age limit on how important this is, and I think it's important across all levels, and it intersects so many of the different models and environments that we work with within education, so many of the systems that we are trying to bridge together. So I think it just really is one of those pillars that will bring together so many of the things that we're hoping to build upon and see. But I also think it's just awareness is, time is going to be the barrier for pretty much anything in education, but I do think there's just the awareness in general of opportunities to have this. I think if I went to most of our middle schools right now and said, hey, would you want a training on this? They would have been like, yes, I've never even thought of that. So I think that's a huge part of it too. Our administrators come from an educational lens, and this is more of like a therapeutic topic. So I think it's just also just like, it's not a card that they recognize is on the table. So I think just like that awareness is a huge piece. I think we talk a lot about relationship building, and I think that just that word attachment needs to be, not to like have like a pun, but attached to the relationship building. And it is just like spreading awareness of it should be on the table.
Captures it. I think it's just this kind of education that we need to emphasize the importance of attachment just isn't there. That foundational knowledge just isn't there. And so people that are making these decisions haven't really, I think the problem is nobody has really dug into this idea. You throw around words like relationship building and motivation, without really digging into like, what are you actually talking about when you are talking about these topics? And so they're just buzzwords. And so until people really start understanding, actually, there's like scientific research backing up these theories. This isn't just being nice. This isn't just, this isn't just like putting a smile on your face. Like there's real research behind these principles. Like, what gets a kid motivated? What is that about? Why do we do things? It's relationship. It's all about connection. But we're missing that. We're not digging into these buzzwords. I think that's the hardest part. A lot of competing ideas about what needs to happen. A lot of emphasis on curriculum. A lot of emphasis on materials. Right? We're shifting the math curriculum that we're using every 2 years, but we're not really digging into like what actually makes education possible, which is motivation, connection, community, all of these essential human things. Like we got to get the human back into education. It's hard to do.